about her experience at Founding Mountain Stuff in the Farmers Market and then the broader way of growing communities, which is the organisation. And we also have Seb Buckton from Strandco, which is in Strand. And he's come to talk about their food hub and the role of open source technologies can play in a sustainable food network. So I think that's, considering some of the things that come out of the research findings that we heard this morning, all the things are, going to be really interesting. After the presentations, there is a question and answer session. So really start thinking about what you would like to ask our three speakers about the work that they're doing. So first of all, have you got the microphone?
Yes. And could you give me 1 minute warning?
Whilst you get your... Oh, 1 minute warning.
At the end? So I don't...
Okay.
Yes.
I'll get my stopwatch on.
So... Morning everyone, sorry. So yes, I'm going to speak for 10 minutes about the work we're doing in Manchester. What we're trying to do in Manchester. The Kindling Trust has been going about 5 years now, and really, I don't need to say this. This is the problem. There's huge challenges within the food system. It's so complex and overwhelming that sometimes you really, really struggle to work out where you can play a really positive role. So these are some figures, national figures and Manchester figures about the challenges we face. But ultimately for us, it's about power and the concentration of wealth and where that wealth is made. And it's kind of made all in the middle, really. So we can run campaigns about plastic bags, we can talk about local food, but for us as a small organisation in Manchester, we're trying to create a system, a food system, that is dealing with the issues of power and distribution of power within it. So what's happened over many, many years, and we have a great food system in many ways. It does many, many good things for us, but what's happened is people have been pushed further and further apart. So farmers and consumers have just been moved further and further apart. And what we've ended up with is consumers on the one hand not having access to healthy, good food, and also living in food poverty, and then you have farmers who are living below the poverty line. So for us, what we wanted to do is see if there's a way of dealing with this. And we had a similar event like this many, many years ago, about 10 years ago, and it just became clear people were really, really passionate about food. But we're all passionate about different bits of food. Some of us are really into fair trade, some of us are vegan. Some of us are really into the healthy side of food. Some of us are foodies and just want to really experience novel, new types of food. So what we've tried to do over the years is try and nurture and harness that excitement and enthusiasm for food in a kind of all-encompassing kind of way. So we run a couple of things, but ultimately down the bottom here, you can see that we're looking at the food system in its entirety, or trying to. The food system's so screwed up, we feel that if we deal with one issue along the supply chain, you either move the problem along, or your solution gets eclipsed by the next problem that comes along. So what we've tried to do in Manchester is create this perfectly formed supply chain. And we haven't got it right yet, and we're doing it at a very small scale. But what we do is we systematically look at the supply chain and see where we as an organisation and a collective of groups can intervene. So the first step for us is feeding Manchester. So it's kind of like this. This is how we started. We went a day away, did a bit of research, looked at the problems, looked at what we could do as a small group of people to bring about a better supply chain. And we have very formal events where we force people to work together. We have really informal events where we get people drunk. And we try and involve everyone in the supply chain. We try and get farmers along, we try and get supermarkets along, we try and get consumers along. What we know is there's a latent demand there for local food and good food. It's probably the same here. In Manchester, the opportunity is huge. It's basically how we tap into that and involve people in this thing that we call sustainable food. So there are these wedge issues like, plastic bags. People are really passionate about plastic bags, and everyone can get involved in reducing their use of plastic bags. But we need to take people on a journey with us. So we might start with plastic bags, but ultimately we end up somewhere much more radical and somewhere that involves a lot more social change to deal with this issue around power. So we've set these various projects up that are looking at the supply chain from the field to the plate, and we've intervened or tried to intervene along the way. So we start off with this latent demand. So we set up Feeding Manchester. So it was an informal place for people to kind of network, to plan, and to kind of have honest and open conversations about what sustainable food is and how we meet that demand. The next thing we did was we set up Manchester Veg People, which has been going 5 years now, and it's a co-op. So it's a co-op of 8 of the most local farmers around Greater Manchester. But for us, what's really crucial is it's a co-op of the buyers and the growers. So the growers are third generation farmers who have 200 acres of land, or horticulture growers, and buyers like, we have the University of Manchester, we have Oldham schools, we've just got a Stockport school on board, and about 40 restaurants and cafes. And they collectively come together and look at how they can supply Manchester with food that is grown within, well, originally it was a 30-mile radius, now it's a 50-mile radius. So there is that demand there. We just need to work out how to tap into it. And the way we do it is that we try and secure big, bulky public sector contracts, which gives us the cash flow and the confidence so that we can then supply people who we feel deserve the food most. So we want to get the best local organic produce into hospitals, schools, prisons. That's our motivation. But to do that, what we also do is sell to high-end restaurants. And Manchester Veg People is basically the farmers working with the public sector and high-end restaurants to get more veg into Manchester. Because Kindling is constantly looking 5-10 years ahead, because we're trying to change the food system and it's going to be a 20-30 year project, what Kindling is constantly doing is trying to balance supply and demand. So the demand might be there, but we don't have enough farmers. You know, we can get more farmers on board, but they won't come on board until we can prove the market's there. So for us, what's worked really well is bringing on board the university, because they have that flexibility. We can start off with 1 cafe, we can expand to 5 cafes, we can take on board the halls of residence. If we had a bad year like we did last year, they can reduce that. Because within Manchester Veg People, your farmers are never supplying all their produce to the co-op, and the co-op is never supplying all the produce that a university or a hospital needs. We'd never be at that scale, and we'd never want that. So for us, we're constantly looking at supply and demand, and it's really clear that that demand is not going to be met in the next 5 years by our existing farmers. So we're working with our existing farmers to increase their yields and their land use. And one of the ways of doing that is we run a project called the Land Army, obviously mirrored on the First and Second World War. And we have 150 volunteers on our database. Any weekend, there'll be maybe 10, 15 people out on the farm. During the week, there might be 10 people out on the farm. So those volunteers go out and work on these farms with us. One of the benefits of that is that we end up supporting people who become advocates for local food and become really, really passionate about the farmers that they've been working with. We kind of saw the Land Army as naively perhaps as a kind of first rung on a ladder to encourage a new generation of farmers that there's a lot of talk about. So we run a various range of courses as well. The first course we run is, do you want to be a farmer? Where we try and put people off, partly because there's a very romantic view of farming, and frankly it's a tough job. We've joked about the course simply should be putting people in a field and taking their mobile phones off them and throwing buckets of water over them. What we do is get them to think very clearly about where they want to go as individuals and as a family. You know, is this for you? Imagine you doing this in 10 years' time with a family. So we run that, and basically 20 people come along, and at the end of it we might have 2 or 3 people who are still really interested in farming. And they might come along to one of our horticulture courses. So we run a 5-day horticulture course. We take the trainees out to 5 of the 8 farmers who are part of Manchester Veg People, and we just teach them about farming. I mean, you don't learn anything in any great detail, but you get a real feel for kind of what the whole thing involves. Then for us, the issue was, well, if these people do want to farm, what's the next challenge to them? And the next challenge was access to land, but not just land, machinery, expertise, and all these things. So we've taken a concept from America and Canada called incubator farms. So we set up the UK's first organic incubator farm 2 or 3 years ago on one of our existing farmers' land out at Abbey Lays. And basically the model is that you come on our training, you go for a recruitment program, and you take on 1/4 acre of land. But with that land, you get the training, and the farmer does all the machinery work for you. And you're there to grow commercially. You're there to grow in rows, not spirals or beds. You're there to grow in rows, and you're there to use a tractor going up and down. We've just taken on a second site out in Stockport, which will be all undercover. So we've got about 10 of these polytunnels that we've taken on. And our vision is to have 4 of these farm start sites dotted around Greater Manchester. And very recently, we've just set up a box scheme with the support of the wonderful growing communities, where we've been supplying the staff of Manchester University. So 50 members of staff pick up our boxes every Tuesday. And the purpose of that really is just to create this other opportunity for our farm starters to provide local produce. Okay. So all I'm going to say is we're trying to create this perfectly formed supply chain. We're really small. We employ directly about 8 or 9 people. We're probably going to sell about 160, 170 grand's worth of veg this year. That's veg that wouldn't have been grown for anyone else. We feel there's huge potential there, but there's an awful lot of work involved, partly because it's around collaboration, partly because we're working with the public sector, partly because we're working with farmers. You know, there's a whole range of challenges there, and we feel that it takes a long time, but it creates a resilience that you can't get any other way. I think I'll stop there. Is that okay?